Hi there. In this video, we will take a look at how can we call REST API in PowerShell. First, let us understand the REST API. The REST API, also known as the RESTful API, is a protocol used to interact with the web application or the service. When using a REST API, we must tell the API the method that we want to use. Let's take a look at the methods of the API. First is the GET method. The HTTP GET method is used to read a resource. Post. The HTTP POST method is used to create a resource. Put. The HTTP PUT method is used to update a resource or replace a resource. The HTTP patch is used to update a resource. And finally, we have delete. The HTTP delete is used to delete a resource. In PowerShell, when we want to invoke the REST API, we have to use the invoke REST method and then supply the URL of the API, which we will soon see in action. APIs can be anonymous or authenticated. In the case of the authenticated API, we need to pass in some additional details while calling an API. Now, to understand the API call, we will be using an API called Numbers API. As you can see, this is the website for Numbers API, and you can also see the way we can call this API. So it has different methods like math, trivia, date, and then you also have an examples to play around, right? So you can click on random/trivia. This is how you can call that API, and it will give some trivia about the number 28 or any other number that's randomly picked up. If you want to get some trivia about a year, it will pick up some random year and then provide the details for that year, right? Similarly, you can also call random/math, and it would give the number and then some trivia about this number. So it's really fun, interesting, API. And this is something that we will be using in our example. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so we are in PowerShell. Let's go ahead and invoke the REST API. So the way we will do it is invoke REST method. We will specify URI, and then let's just copy one of the URI. So let's just pick up this. We're gonna copy this. Let's go back and put it over here. Let's remove this. Let's go ahead, hit run, and you can see 5 is the third prime number. That's the output which we got. Okay, so let's try some different number. So let's go ahead and change the URI. Instead of 42, maybe let's just go with 78. Let's see what it returns. So 78 is the number of lines that make up Metatron's cube. Okay, so some trivia, some facts that we get from calling the API, and you can actually use any API method that is supported and available. Put this back here, date, click on this, and we get the response. Okay. Now, usually you will not get a simple response like this when you call the API. Most likely, you will get a JSON response when you call the API. A JSON is called JavaScript Object Notation. So when you get the JSON as a response by calling the API, we need to parse the JSON so that we can read the values which is part of the JSON return value. So let's first take a look at one of the JSON. So let me go ahead and declare a variable. Let's just call it a JSON object. I'm just gonna create a multi-line here, and let me just put a JSON object out there. All right, so we have a JSON object where we have some accounts. In the accounts, we have users. In the users, we have a user names, and then given name, surname, department. And this is an example of JSON object. Okay, Now what we need to do is we need to convert this JSON into the proper object way so that we can access them. Okay, let's say you've got this response as a part of your API call. So first let us declare a variable. Let's call it converted JSON object equals to, let's pick this variable JSON object, and then we'll say convert from JSON. All right, so now we have that converted. So if you now access converted JSON object dot, we now first know its accounts. So you can say accounts, then we say dot users, then we'll say dot, let's say JDO, and then we can call dot given name. All right, so let's go ahead, try to write this on the right host. Let's clear this. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute this, hit on run, and we can see successfully we were able to retrieve given name of JDO. Right, so if we change this from JDO to A Smith, you can say A Smith and then department, let's hit run, and you will see IT is returned. Right, so if you have the JSON object, this is how you can actually parse the JSON object, and then you can access the individual part of JSON, and then you can retrieve the value. Okay, now for an example, if you use accounts.users of 0, now here if you see, this is just one single array of the users. So let's go ahead and hit run, and you will see that users 0 has returned the JDO, JDO2 and A Smith. Okay, and if you also will put dot, you will see that you will also be able to access the individual user, and if you put further dot, you will also see you will be able to access the individual attribute, right, and you'll be able to retrieve them. So I hope this simple example helped you to understand how can you call an API, and especially if it's anonymous. We have not covered the authenticated API. We will cover that as well, but in this example it was all about the anonymous API. And once you get a response back, how can you parse a JSON and access the specific value which is part of the JSON response. I thank you for watching the video.